He did not drive out to the coast because he cared. He drove because Linnea Rourke held the ledgers that could bury him, and Caspar Vella never left a loose thread untended. 11 days before a marriage meant to fuse two shipping empires into one, the one person who had never missed a single morning in 4 years simply stopped answering. He expected to find her gone, bought, or turned. Instead, the low tide at Sable Cove carried the smell of salt and something colder beneath it, and it stopped his fury where he stood. What the water had left on that pale ribbon of sand did not merely crack the careful order he had built his entire life around, it made him tear up the wedding, the alliance, and everything he had spent years telling himself he wanted. Caspar Vella liked rooms he could control, and the office on the top floor of the harbor tower was the most controlled room he owned, glass on 3 sides. Below it, the whole working throat of the port lay spread out in the failing light, the cranes folding down for the evening, the container stacks glowing amber under the sodium lamps, the black water of the marina shivering with the reflection of a city that paid him. He stood at the window with a glass of something old and expensive he had not tasted and felt nothing at all. That was the point of the room. Up here, the noise of the world stopped, and Caspar had spent a great deal of money making sure nothing in his life ever raised its voice at him without his permission. Behind him, seated at the long steel table with a leather folder open in front of her, Cosima Sorrel was talking about napkins. "The linen has to be bone, not ivory," she said, not looking up. "Ivory reads cheap under the marquee lighting, and my mother will notice from across the lawn bone. I told the planner twice already, and she keeps sending swatches of the wrong thing. If she sends a third, I will find a planner who can tell one shade of white from another." "Whatever you prefer," Caspar said. "That is not an answer. That is, you not listening." "I am listening. Bone, not ivory." He turned from the glass. She was very beautiful in the way certain expensive things were beautiful, the kind that looked best behind glass and did not improve when you touched them. Dark hair pinned back without a single strand out of place. A wristwatch worth more than most of the men who worked his docks earned in a year. She belonged to a family that owned 3 ports up the coast and a great deal of the machinery that moved money quietly between them, and in 11 days she would legally belong to him, which was to say the 2 families would legally belong to each other. Neither of them had ever pretended it was more than arithmetic. "You seem distracted," Cosima said, finally lifting her eyes. They were a pale, cool gray, and they measured him the way a buyer measures a horse before an auction, looking for the flaw that will bring the price down. "You have been distracted all week. If you are having doubts, this is a poor moment to discover them. My father does not enjoy surprises, and he enjoys them least in the last stretch of a negotiation." "No doubts," he said. "I have a business to run and a wedding you are running for me. Both are demanding. Neither is in question." That earned him the ghost of a smile, because it was the kind of thing she understood. Cosima did not want tenderness from him, and would have been suspicious of it if he had offered any. She wanted competence, discretion, and a husband who would not embarrass her in front of the families who mattered. In exchange, she offered exactly the same, which was the cleanest kind of contract. Caspar knew it was. He had told himself many times, better than love. Cleaner than love, which he had watched dismantle, sharper men than himself, men who had built empires with steady hands and then handed the keys to whoever made their chest ache. Love made you readable. It gave your enemies a soft place to press a thumb, and Caspar had spent his entire adult life making certain he had no soft places left to press. He crossed to the table and signed the merger documents. She slid toward him without reading past the first page, because his lawyers had already read every clause twice, and because reading it himself would have meant caring about it in a way he did not. Route allocations, combined tariffs on the northern lanes, a clause about which family's flag flew over which berth. His pen moved across the pages in the small pool of lamplight, while Cosima returned to her swatches, and the ordinary machinery of his ordinary evening ground quietly forward, smooth and lubricated and empty. It was nearly 7 when the small wrongness surfaced. His phone, face down on the steel beside his untouched glass, had not buzzed once since he arrived. That in itself was not strange. What was strange was that it should have. Every morning at 7, and every evening before he left the tower, a single message arrived from Linnea Rourke, no matter where in the world either of them happened to be. Never more than a line. The manifest for the oldest cleared customs. The Merrick payment is confirmed. Hold on the second wire until you say. 4 years of those messages, arriving with the reliability of the tide itself, so constant and so quiet, that he had long ago stopped noticing them the way a man stops noticing his own heartbeat, right up until the moment it skips. It had skipped this morning. It had skipped again tonight. Caspar set the pen down and turned the phone over. Nothing since a routine note 2 days ago. An ordinary line about an ordinary shipment. He scrolled back frowning and read the last thing she had sent him, and it told him precisely nothing, which was exactly the trouble. Linnea Rourke did not go quiet. Linnea Rourke had once sent him a full status report from a dentist's chair, typing one-handed around the equipment in her mouth. In 4 years, she had never once simply not been there, and the absence of her, now that he was looking directly at it, had a weight to it, a shape, like the cold spot in a warm room that tells you a window has been left open somewhere out of sight. "Something wrong?" Cosima asked, catching the change in him the way a good predator catches a change in the wind, long before it can see what caused it. "My assistant hasn't checked in," Caspar said. Cosima made a small sound that was almost a laugh, elegant and dismissive, at once. "Your assistant, Caspar. We are 11 days out. Half my family lands this weekend. The coordinator is threatening to walk over the seating chart. My mother has opinions about the flowers that could start a small war. And you are standing at that window, worried about a woman who files your paperwork. She does considerably more than file paperwork. Then she is considerably overpaid and can certainly afford a day to herself." Cosima closed her folder with a soft, final snap, the sound of a woman drawing a line under a subject. "Let your people handle it. That is what you keep an army of them for, is it not? You do not go chasing after a secretary. In the week you are meant to be getting married. Think about how it looks. It looks unwell. It looks like a man whose attention is not where his family needs it to be." He did not answer her, because the honest answer would have told her far more about the true shape of his operation than she was entitled to know before the ink on the merger was dry. Cosima thought Linnea Rourke filed paperwork. Nearly everyone who ever laid eyes on Linnea thought some version of the same thing, and that was not an accident. She was a woman of medium height in quiet clothes, who kept her eyes down and her voice level, who remembered how every person in the building took their coffee and never once seemed to want anything for herself. She was so deliberately unremarkable that men twice her size forgot she was in the room with them, and went on saying things in front of her that they would never have said in front of a man they respected. That was the entire point of her. That was precisely what made her the single most dangerous person on his payroll. Because Linnea Rourke did not file paperwork, Linnea Rourke held the encryption keys to every offshore account the family so much as breathed on. She kept the true books, the ones that never went anywhere near a machine his enemies might reach, the physical record of which official had taken which envelope, and which vessel had carried what beneath its declared cargo. When 2 enforcers from a rival crew had come up to this floor last spring to lean on him, one of them knocking a lamp off a side table just to hear it break, Linnea had walked straight down the middle of them, with a tray of coffee, set it on the desk without so much as a rattle of the cups, and asked the larger of the 2 men, very politely, whether he would mind moving his boot so she could reach the wall outlet. He had moved it. He had actually apologized. He had not understood, then or later, why he had done either of those things. She unnerved people precisely because she refused to be intimidated, and she did it so quietly that they never realized they had been beaten until they were already in the elevator going down. If a person like that vanished, there were only ever going to be two explanations. Either she had finally decided to sell him, taking the keys and the books and the whole, buried architecture of his life to whoever would pay her the most, or someone had taken her to pry those same things out of her by force. Both roads ended in the same place, with his empire slit open from throat to belly like a fish on a dock, and both of them were his problem and his alone, because the knowledge she carried in her head was far too dangerous to hand out to a search party of ordinary men. He picked up the phone again and made one call, not to her, but to the man who managed his security and his data, a careful person who did not ask why. He asked a single question. He listened for the better part of a minute. And what came back, down the line, turned the cold thread in his chest into something with real weight, something that pulled. Her phone had gone dark 2 days ago, the man said. But in the moments before it died, it had thrown up one last location, the automatic kind of ping a handset sends when it wakes and finds no familiar signal to lean on. It had not come from her apartment in the city, where she was supposed to be sleeping. It had not come from the tower, or from any of the family's holdings, or from anywhere on earth she had a single reason to be. It had come from a thin stretch of shoreline, 40 minutes down the coast road, past the very last of the commercial berths, out where the map went pale and stopped bothering to name things. Sable Cove. A place with no offices, no safe houses, no business of his of any kind, and no reason under heaven for a woman who filed paperwork to be standing in the dark with a dying phone in her hand. Caspar stood, and the movement was abrupt enough that Cosima's cool gray eyes went sharp and still. "Where are you going?" she said. It was not really a question. It was a woman testing the ground under her own feet. "Out. We have the tasting at 9. My parents are expecting us. My father flew in specifically." He was already pulling his coat from the back of the chair, already sliding his arms into the sleeves, already feeling the familiar honest weight of the holster settle against his ribs as he shrugged the wool over it. "Give them my regrets." "Caspar?" She rose to her feet, and for the first time all evening, something genuine crossed her face. Not affection, she had none to spare him, but calculation, the sharp attention of a woman who has felt a carefully built arrangement shift on its base. "If you walk out of this building tonight to go dig some runaway employee out of a beach town, I want you to understand very clearly how that will read to my father. He does not forgive being made to wait, and he forgets nothing. Send a man. Send 10 men. That is what men are for." Caspar stopped at the door and looked back at her, at the flawless hair and the priceless watch and the leather folder full of napkin swatches, at a woman whose whole clean, cushioned life had never once been so much as brushed by the blood that paid for the ring already sitting in a velvet box in his desk drawer downstairs. He thought about the single ping out at Sable Cove, out there in the dark, where there was nothing at all but cold water and colder sand, and a woman who had never in 4 years failed to answer him. "I don't send men to handle the things that can end me," he said. "I handle those myself." And he left her standing there among the merger documents and the swatches, the little brass fixtures of the tower door, easing shut behind him with a soft and final click, while somewhere 40 minutes down a dark and narrowing coast road, the tide was already turning over and over the thing he was driving out to find. The coast road unspooled black and wet in front of the headlights, and Kellen drove it fast, the way Caspar had told him to, without needing to say it twice, the tires hissing over rain that had fallen earlier in the evening and not yet dried from the tarmac. The city thinned out behind them by degrees. First, the tower and the working port, all light and steel. Then the long gray stretch of warehouses and fuel depots standing silent behind their fences. Then the outer berths where the big dead ships went to be cut apart for scrap, their rusting hulls looming up out of the dark like the ribs of enormous animals picked clean. After that, there was very little left to see. A shuttered bait shop, a caravan park with 2 lit windows, and a dog barking somewhere out of sight. The road narrowing steadily, the street lamps thinning, and then giving up one by one, until at last there was only the twin cone of the headlights on the wet road ahead, and, off to the left, where the land fell suddenly away, the pale and restless line of the sea. Caspar sat in the back with his phone dark in his hand and did not look at it. He was looking instead at the thing he had spent 2 full days, carefully, not looking at, which was the exact shape of his own carelessness, held up now to the light, where he could no longer avoid it. He had seen her, that last evening. Thursday. She had been standing at the machine that shredded the sensitive papers, feeding them in one careful sheet at a time, the way she did everything, and he had walked past her on his way out, with barely half a glance, because he had a fitting and a dinner and a head full of route allocations. But he had glanced, and in the space of that glance, he had registered, and then immediately dismissed, that something about her was wrong. Her skin, usually an even healthy pale, had gone the color of old candle wax. There had been a mark along the clean line of her jaw, a darkening bruise, badly hidden under makeup, that did not quite match her tone. He had actually paused. He had actually asked her about it. One short question, with his hand already on the door. And she had given him that flat, dry, unbothered look of hers, and told him she had walked into the corner of an open cabinet door, and he had accepted it without a second thought, because it was late, and because a woman who never once made trouble telling him there was no trouble. She had asked him for something too, weeks before that. She had come into his office with her tablet held against her chest like a shield, and asked him. In that particular careful voice she used only when she had already privately decided he would say no, whether she might take 3 days for herself at the end of the month. Personal, she had said, and nothing more, because she never gave more than that. He had told her this was the worst possible month for it, that the merger needed her hands on everything, that surely whatever it was could keep, until after the wedding. She had said of course, she had not asked a second time. And he had felt, for perhaps 4 seconds, the small, clean satisfaction of a man whose machine is running exactly as it should, and then he had forgotten the entire exchange completely. The way you forget a door you have closed behind you. Caspar closed his eyes in the dark of the moving car and felt that old satisfaction curdle in him into something that tasted like rust and iron at the back of his throat. "Boss," Kellen's voice from the front, careful, pitched low. His eyes flicked up to the mirror and away again just as fast. "You should know where this road goes if you don't already. Another few miles on, and we're past the line. Sable Cove and everything south of the point, all of that is water the Adlers claim as theirs. We've got no arrangement out this far, no friends, no eyes on the ground, no favors we can call. If something's sitting out there waiting for us, there's nobody coming to help. I know whose water it is, I'm only saying it out loud. 11 days before you're set to marry into the man's own family, and we're driving straight into his backyard in the dark with no call made ahead." Kellen's hands shifted once on the wheel, resettling. "That's all I'm saying." "Drive?" Caspar said, but the word came out of him quieter than he had meant it to, because Kellen had just said aloud the exact thing that had been sitting in his own chest, unspoken, since the security man had first named the location down the phone. Sable Cove was Adler ground. Linnea's last living signal had come up out of Adler ground, and Linnea kept the one and only complete record of everything Caspar's family truly owned and everything it truly owed, the precise kind of record that a family quietly preparing to swallow another family whole would give almost anything to get its hands on before the swallowing began. He had spent the entire drive so far telling himself, against all the evidence, that there was some innocent shape this could still take, some ordinary explanation waiting at the end of the road. He could no longer find one anywhere, no matter how he turned it. The road bent hard to the left around a shoulder of rock. Through a low gap in the wind-bent scrub, the cove opened up below them all at once, a shallow curve of pale sand, held between 2 black arms of stone reaching out into the water. The sea beyond it, the color of pewter and moving in long, slow swells. There was no pier down there, no light of any kind, no building at all, but the pale bones of an old lifeguard stand, leaning at the north end of the sand, half fallen. Kellen brought the car down the last of the slope in low gear and stopped it where the crumbling tarmac gave up and turned to sand and killed the engine. In the sudden ringing silence that rushed in behind it, the sea came up loud and close, a long, dragging hush drawn out over the pebbles, and then the heavy collapse of a wave, and then again patient and indifferent to anything a man might want from it. Caspar got out. The wind coming off, the water hit him at once, cold and thick with salt, plastering the coat against his side. He stood beside the car and let his eyes adjust to the dark, and the beach resolved itself slowly out of the gloom, gray sand and darker banks of weed thrown up along the tide line, and the white lace of the water creeping up and drawing back, creeping and drawing back. Empty. For one long breath he almost let himself believe it was empty, that the ping had been a glitch, that she was asleep in her apartment after all, and would answer him in the morning as she always had. Then, far down toward the South Rocks, where the last of the failing gray light caught the wet sand and turned it briefly to dull-hammered metal, he saw a shape that did not belong to the honest geometry of stone and water. Something low to the ground, something that the tide was reaching for and drawing back from, reaching and drawing back, as though the sea itself could not quite decide whether to take it or leave it behind. "Stay with the car," Caspar said, and started walking toward it. And then, because his legs had understood the shape of it long before his mind would let itself, he was running. He had crossed the dead before. He had made a fair number of them himself, and he knew, from a distance, the particular stillness of a thing that used to be a person, the way it lies heavier and flatter than any sleep, the way the shape of it stops arguing with the ground. As he ran the long length of that cold beach, with his heart slamming against his ribs and the loose sand dragging at his shoes, he was preparing himself, with every stride, to find exactly that at the end of it. And rising up underneath the grim preparation was rage. A white, total, silent rage. Because if this was the Adlers, if they had taken her and used her up and thrown her here on their own sand as a message for him to find, then the wedding was already a corpse in the water, and he would put every last member of that family into the ground beside her before the season turned. He reached the shape and went straight down onto his knees, in the wet sand beside it, and the rage collided with the truth and shattered into nothing. It was Linnea. She was lying on her side, half in and half out of the reaching tide line, one arm flung up over her head, as though she had been dragging herself toward the dry sand and had simply run out of everything before she reached it. She was barefoot. She wore what was left of a dark blouse and dark trousers, the fabric torn in places and heavy with seawater, and her skin, where it showed through, was the terrible gray and white of a body that has been too cold for far too long, the color gone out of it entirely. Sand was crusted along one whole side of her, worked into her hair, gritted at the corner of her mouth. High on her shoulder there was a wound, hastily bound with a strip of her own torn sleeve, and long since soaked through, the crude dressing, dark and stiff with salt. Across her ribs, under the ruined blouse, he could see the deep spreading bruising of a body that had been thrown hard against something unforgiving. More than once, she was not moving. And then, as the cold water came up the sand and touched her bare skin, she was. Her fingers, the ones on the flung-up arm, curled a bare fraction into the wet sand. It was almost nothing at all. It was everything in the world. No, no, no. Caspar had her up out of the water before he had consciously decided to move a muscle, hauling her by the shoulders up the slope of the sand and away from the reaching tide, and the moment he had her clear of it, he found he could not remember a single thing he had ever known about how to do this. He who had watched Halloran dig bullets out of gut-shot men on cold cellar floors, without his own pulse so much as lifting, knelt there over his half-drowned assistant, on a black beach, with his hands hovering uselessly above her, shaking, not knowing where he was permitted to touch. Linnea, Linnea, look at me. Open your eyes and look at me. Her eyelids fluttered. That was the whole of it. Her lips were the deep color of a fresh bruise, and they moved without any sound, and he bent his head down close to her mouth, close enough to feel the faint and terrible thread of her breath against his cheek, and heard nothing, no words. Only the enormous effort of a body spending the very last of its reserves on the single narrow task of continuing to breathe. And then her fingers, the ones that had curled in the sand, found the wet wool of his coat where it hung over her and closed on it, not gripping, not pulling, just closing and holding. As though even now, drowned and frozen and dragged past the far edge of speech, some stubborn part of her had catalogued him the instant he arrived and filed him, without hesitation, under the single heading of the thing to hold on to. And there, kneeling in the surf, with the cold seawater coming up through the knees of his trousers, the story he had driven all the way out here, believing came apart in his hands like wet paper. He had come expecting a betrayal, a runaway, a body left as a taunt on the enemy's shore. But the Adlers did not leave their messages this way, and he knew it the moment he let himself think clearly. A message was placed. A message was clean and central and impossible to miss, laid out somewhere he would be certain to find it. Nobody had placed Linnea here. She was down at the very far south end of the cove, half swallowed by the tide, in the worst and least visible corner of the whole beach, torn and battered and scoured, raw by the salt, and still somehow holding on to the hem of his coat. Nobody had left her here. She had come here. Under her own dying power, out of the black water, she had come to this exact place. "You're all right," he said, which was a lie, and they both knew it, and he stripped off the soaked coat and got it around her thin shoulders anyway, and then gathered her up off the cold sand and into his arms. And she weighed so little, so terribly little, that the rage came surging back up through the fear as a different creature entirely. Turned now inward, aimed at himself, at 4 straight years of walking past this woman every single morning, without once seeing the weight she had been carrying alone. "You're all right. I have you now. I have you." Her eyes came open. Just barely. Just enough to find his face there in the dark above her, and to hold on to it, and to know it for what it was. Her cracked lips moved one more time, and this time, faint as the silence in the space between 2 breaking waves, a sound made it out of her. "You're late," she breathed. And then her eyes rolled closed, and her head fell heavily against his chest, and Kaspar Vela, who did not run for any living soul, ran back up the length of that black beach, with her held hard and close against him, and screamed into the wind for Kellen to start the car. She did not wake fully for a long time, and when she did surface, it came in broken pieces, in the back of the speeding car, with a rough blanket from the boot wrapped around her, and Kaspar's arm braced hard behind her shoulders to keep her from sliding down on the turns. Kellen drove and did not ask a single question, taking the corners of the coast road exactly as fast as he had been silently told to. Kaspar had already made the one call that mattered, and Halloran and his bag would be waiting under the lights at the house, and until they got there all Kaspar could do was keep her upright and keep talking to her in a low, steady voice he did not entirely recognize as his own, and try to piece the story together. Out of the broken fragments she surrendered to him between long gray silences. It came out slowly and backward, the end of it before the beginning, but over the miles in pieces. "The books," she said first, the moment she could shape words at all, her voice a ruin of salt and cold and exhaustion. "I still have them. What matters is safe. You have to listen to me now while I can. The books can burn for all I care. Be quiet. Save what you have." "No!" Her hand found his sleeve again with that same stubborn, impossible strength, closing on the fabric. "You don't understand what it is that I found. That is exactly why you have to listen while I am still able to tell you." She stopped and dragged in a breath that seemed to cost her more than she had. The marriage. It was never going to be a marriage, Caspar. The Adlers were never going to merge their family with yours. They were going to fold you in and hold you close, and then cut you out from the inside. He had suspected as much, in the abstract, the distant way a careful man suspects everyone and everything. Hearing it laid out flat and plain by a woman who was half dead in the back of his own car was another thing entirely, and it went through him like cold water. He kept his voice level for her sake. "Go on, tell me all of it." She told it to him in fragments over the next few miles, and he assembled them into a shape as she went. Some weeks ago now she had noticed money moving in a way it should not have moved. Small transfers routed quietly through a shell company that on paper handled nothing but the ordinary harbor tariffs, and pointed, when she followed them back to their source, at a particular private bank the Adlers had always favored. Donnan Island, a very long way from anyone's jurisdiction, she had done what she always did when she found a loose thread. She had said nothing to anyone and begun, quietly and alone, to pull on it. Because bringing him a suspicion without ironclad proof, 3 weeks out from his own wedding, would have looked exactly like a woman trying to sabotage a marriage she disapproved of, and he would have thought less of her for it, and that she could not have borne. So she had chased it down herself, in the evenings, on her own time. And the thread had led her in the end to a courier, a man carrying physical documents between the Adler organization and someone inside Casper's own house. And 2 days ago she had gone alone to intercept him. He was Adler muscle, she said, and something flickered across her ruined face that might, in a healthier woman, have been the ghost of professional disgust at her own mistake. Not a courier, at all. A trap wearing a courier's clothes and carrying a courier's bag. They already knew somebody had been pulling at the thread. They simply did not know. The somebody was the secretary. A thin breath. Nobody ever thinks it is the secretary. That is the one advantage I have ever had, and I spent it on this. They had taken her out onto the water. That was the part he had not been able to understand, kneeling on the beach, and understood now, and hearing it turned his stomach over. They had put her on a boat, meaning to make her disappear, the way people disappear off boats in the dark, with no body and no beach, and no message left behind, simply a woman who quietly stopped existing between one Tuesday and the next. They had been rough with her on the way out, rougher than they needed to be, the deep bruising along her ribs, the torn shoulder, the darkening mark along her jaw that he had seen with his own eyes days ago, and let her wave away as a cabinet door. And somewhere out, past the point, in the full dark, with the engine idling, while the men argued in low voices about weights and distances from shore, she had gone over the side, and into the sea. "You jumped," Caspar said. He could barely force the words out. "I fell," she said, and the corner of her cracked mouth pulled a horrible small fraction of her old dryness surfacing through the wreckage. "On purpose. There is a difference, and I would like it on the record." And here was the thing that undid him completely. The thing that reached all the way back through 4 years and quietly rearranged every unremarkable day he had ever spent not looking at her. She had not drowned. By every law of the cold world she should have. A woman goes off the side of a boat into open black water at night, bleeding from the shoulder. And that is the end of the sentence. But Linnea Rourke had swum. She had swum a very long way in the dark and the cold, with a torn shoulder dragging at every stroke, because she had known, the way a person knows their own name, in their sleep, exactly which direction the land lay, and exactly which single piece of it to aim herself at. Sable Cove, not the nearest shore, not the easiest landing, a specific shore, chosen out of all the dark coastline available to her. "Why there?" he said. "Why that one beach? You could have died 100 yards short of any stretch of sand on this whole coast, Why swim the extra distance for that particular one? She was quiet for so long that he thought she had gone under again into the gray. Then, because I know it, she said, every current that runs in that cove, where the rip pulls out and where it lets you rest, which way the tide runs there at night against the point. Her eyes came open and found his in the dark of the car and held them. I swim there. I have swum there for years. There is a facility just up the cliff path above it. Long-term care, the good kind. The kind with a garden. My brother is there. Julian. A shallow breath, effortful. I go to him on my 3 days when I am given them. I sit with him through the afternoons, and in the early mornings before he wakes, I go down and swim the cove, because it is the one single place left in the entire world where nobody at all needs anything from me. The dryness. Again, faint, cracking at the edges. I asked you, for 3 days this month, to go and see him. You told me it was the worst possible time. Caspar sat with that in the dark of the car and found that he could not speak at all. He had thought of her, for 4 years, as a woman with no life outside the door of his office. And he understood now that he had thought it because it suited him so perfectly to think it, because a person with no life of her own is a person who is simply, reliably, eternally there when you reach for her. And all along, she had been carrying a brother in a bed at the top of a cliff path, paying, somehow, for a kind of care he had never once wondered how she could afford on what he paid her, hoarding 3 days out of every year to sit at that bedside. She had made herself into the perfect invisible instrument of his empire, and then gone home each night to a whole life he had never troubled himself to imagine. And when she had stumbled by accident onto the one thing that could save his life, she had chased it out into open water, rather than risk him thinking, for even a single moment, that she was anything less than useful to him. The proof, he said at last, because his voice would not manage anything larger than the 2 words. You said what matters is safe. Tell me where, sealed, waterproofed, caged before I ever went near the courier. I am not an amateur, whatever else I am. Her eyes were sliding closed again. The long effort of the telling, spending down the last of what she had left. It names the courier, it names the accounts, all of them, and the bank, and the dates. And it names the person inside your own house who has been feeding every last piece of you to them for money. Her head tipped sideways and came to rest against his shoulder and stayed there. Her voice dropped to almost nothing, so that he had to bend down close to catch the last of it over the engine and the road noise. You are not going to like the name, Caspar. When you hear it, you are going to like it even less than I did, and I have had 2 days to sit with it. And then she was gone again, under and limp against his side. And the car tore on through the dark toward the house and the doctor, and a name she had carried all the way out of the Black Sea and had not yet been able to say aloud. The house swallowed them the way it always did, all pale stone and cold glass and long silent corridors that smelled of hothouse flowers and floor polish and money. Cullen brought the car up hard under the portico, and Caspar was out of it and carrying her before it had fully stopped rocking on its springs. And Halloran was already there in the lit doorway with his bag open and his sleeves pushed up past the elbow, and for a long while the quiet house filled with the fast, clipped language of a man working to keep another person alive. They took her to a ground-floor room with good light and a wide bed. Caspar stood in the corner of it, with his ruined coat still hanging off his shoulders and his hands still faintly pink from the salt water. And he did not leave, and nobody was foolish enough to ask him to. It was Halloran who finally broke the working silence, an hour in, with the numbers. Her core temperature was low and climbing back toward normal far too slowly for his liking. The wound high on her shoulder had gone bad the way a wound will when it has spent 2 days steeped in seawater and salt, and it would need opening and cleaning and watching. She was starved, thin under the fresh bruises, the doctor said, and did not soften it a body that had plainly been quietly spending itself down to the bone for a long while before the sea ever got its hands on her. But she was strong. Halloran said that last part while looking at Caspar directly across the bed, as though he had decided it was a thing that needed saying out loud in that room. Whatever else she was strong, and she had swum a distance in that condition that he frankly did not believe was possible, and she was, barring a turn in the night, going to live. Caspar took the phone out of his coat pocket then, and looked at the screen of it, and saw 11 missed messages stacked up from Cosima, and one more from a number he knew perfectly well belonged to her father. And he understood, holding it, that the whole cold arithmetic of his old life was still sitting out there patiently, on the far side of the door, waiting for him to finish this, and come back to it, and pick it up where he had set it down. He walked out through the house to the wide terrace at the back, the flat lawn running down in the dark to the low wall at its edge, the place where in 11 days 300 guests were meant to stand under bone-colored linen and watch two shipping empires quietly become one. He dialed Cosima, and she answered before the first ring had finished, her voice already honed to an edge. "You have humiliated me," she said, low and furious. "My father sat at that tasting for 2 hours, waiting on you. 2 hours. Do you have the faintest idea what that costs? Where are you?" "Cosima, listen to me carefully, because I am only going to say this to you the one time." He stood at the wall and watched the black water moving beyond it. His voice, when it came, was very calm and very even, and calm from him was the particular sound that made grown and dangerous men go still in their chairs. "There is no tasting, there is no seating chart, there is no rehearsal, and there is no wedding. It is finished, all of it." There was a silence down the line, and inside it he could hear her recalibrating its speed, hunting for the angle for the lever. "You cannot," she said at last. "You cannot simply. Do you have any understanding of what my father has built this arrangement around? This is a merger, Caspar. There are agreements in place. There are people who have been paid." "It was never a merger," he said. "It was a swallowing, and you knew it, and your father knew it, and the men on the boat he sent out past the point 2 nights ago knew it best of all. Now tell him something for me." He let the pause stretch out and settle. "Tell him the courier he sent out to tidy away a loose end was sloppy about it. Tell him the loose end swam home. And tell him, word for word, that my secretary sends him her regards." He heard the small, sharp intake of her breath down the line, the sound of a carefully arranged face, finally cracking straight across, and he did not wait around for whatever was going to come after it. He ended the call. And he did not throw the phone off the terrace, or crush it in his fist, because that was a young man's gesture, and he was not, standing there, feeling like a young man. He simply slid it back into his pocket and stood a moment longer in the cold wind, in the exact spot where his old life had been scheduled to take place, and felt the strange lightness of a man who has just set down a great weight he had carried for so many years that he had long ago mistaken it for a part of his own body. Then he turned and went back inside to the room with the good light, and pulled a chair up to the side of the bed where Linnea Rourke lay sleeping under clean white blankets, with a line running fluid into the back of one thin hand, and he sat down in it, and he stayed. She woke a little before dawn, and the first thing she did, before her eyes were even fully open, before she seemed to have any idea where in the world she was try to push herself upright and reach out for something that was not there. "The proof," she said. "Where is it?" "Safe. Kellen has it locked in the study exactly where you would have put it yourself." "Lie down." She did not lie down. She got herself up against the piled pillows, by sheer stubbornness, hissing through her teeth as the movement pulled at the wound in her shoulder, and looked slowly around the strange, unfamiliar room, and then at him, at the chair he had plainly not left all night, at the salt still dried in a white crust into the collar of the shirt he had not changed. Something moved behind her eyes, quick and complicated there, and gone, and then the familiar shutter came down over it the way it always did, and she was the assistant again, flat and dry and entirely unreadable. "You cancelled the wedding," she said. "It was not a question. I cancelled a business arrangement with the daughter of the man who owns half of this coastline, 11 days out from 300 guests." She let her head fall back against the pillows. "You have made an open enemy of someone who was, until last night, pretending very convincingly to be a friend. And you have done it before. You know how deep the friend's knife has already gone into your back. You need that proof read and understood, and you need it now, not when I am better. Now today, while there is still time to act on it. You are not reading anything today. By my doctor's count, you have been clinically dead twice since Tuesday. Tell me the name and I will do the rest of it myself. You cannot do the rest of it yourself." A flicker of the old irritation surfaced, and it was oddly the most alive she had looked since the beach. "The drive is locked the way I lock things, which is to say you will not open it, and neither will anyone you can find or buy or threaten. And the name is only the beginning. The name is attached to a map Caspar dates. Which shipments he flagged for them and when. Which of your own routines he handed over. If you go charging at this with nothing but a name and your temper, you will kill the one man and learn nothing about everything he already sold, and they will use it to open you up next month, while you are still standing over the body congratulating yourself." She held his eye. "You need me at that machine. Have Kellen bring it here." He did not want to. Every part of him that had knelt in the surf on that beach wanted to have Halloran sedate her and keep her flat on her back for a solid week. But the other part of him, the part that had built an entire empire out of nothing and kept it standing through worse than this, knew she was right, and knew, worse, that she knew it and was too tired to bother pretending otherwise. So he had Kellen bring the laptop and the sealed waterproofed drive-up from the study, and he propped her up against the pillows with his own hands. And he stood at her shoulder while her salt-cracked fingers moved across the keys with a speed and certainty her wrecked and shaking body had no business producing. Muscle remembers things the flesh has long since given up on. She peeled the layers of encryption back one after another, and the screen filled up with the ordered and damning record of his own quiet betrayal. And she scrolled through it and found the transfers she was looking for, and opened a file attached to the largest of them, and went completely still. "There," she said, very quietly. "That is him." He read the name on the glowing screen over her shoulder, and the floor of the whole world tilted under his feet. Anselm Voss. The man who had first closed Caspar's 9-year-old fingers around the handle of a wooden practice knife and shown him, over and over, how to hold it so it would not be taken from him. The man who had carried one corner of his father's coffin through the rain and had come back to the house alone afterward and sat up in the dark with a grieving boy until the boy finally slept. Not blood. Better than blood, Caspar had always privately believed, because blood was only an accident of birth, and Anselm had actually chosen him freely, again and again, his underboss, his right hand for 20 years. The single man in the entire organization he had never once thought to watch. "He routed the tariff money for them," Linnea said, and her voice had dropped and gone gentle in a way she rarely let it, because she could see plainly what the name was doing to him. "He gave them the shipping schedules, months of them. And Caspar, he gave them your movements, your routines, which days you travel light and with only Chilean, which car you take, which door you use when you think no one is counting." She scrolled down further and stopped, and he saw her jaw tighten. "And there is a meeting tonight. He is handing over the last of it in person, the physical originals, the things too dangerous to ever send down a wire. A place along the coast called Kestrel Point. There is an old boathouse out at the end of it." She looked up at him. "It is set for the small hours. He believes you will be right here, drowning the wreck of your cancelled wedding in a bottle. He has not the faintest idea that you are holding the very map he drew for them." "Then I have, until the small hours," Caspar said, and the terrible flat calm was back in his voice, and it was almost a relief to feel it settle over him because it was so much simpler and cleaner than everything churning underneath it. He gave the orders through the open door without raising his voice, and Kellen moved to carry them out, and down through the house the family began quietly and efficiently arming itself for the night ahead. And when he turned back to the bed, she had pushed herself up further against the pillows and swung her legs toward the edge of the mattress, and there was a look on her battered face that he had seen only once before, out on the black sand at the far end of the cove, a raw and unshuttered thing she never let anyone see. "I am coming with you." "No, you are not. I know the layout of that boathouse. It is on the drive. I studied it. I know which door, and which windows, and where a man standing inside would be able to see, and where he would be blind. You have been to war enough for 1 week." He crossed to the bed, and because she was already trying to force herself up onto her feet, caught her gently by the shoulders and held her upright, and felt through his hands exactly how badly she trembled, with the sheer effort of pretending to herself and to him that she could do this. And then she did the one thing that stopped him, completely. Her hands came up off the blanket and gripped his forearms hard, and her voice, when it came out of her, was not flat and was not dry at all. "Caspar, please." She never said please. In 4 years of standing outside his door, she had informed him, and arranged him, and quietly steered him around 100 obstacles he never even saw, and she had not once, in all that time, asked him for a single thing. And he understood, standing there in the dawnlight, holding her up, that the pleas had nothing whatever to do with the boathouse. It was the raw terror of a woman who had swum a black sea, rather than be seen as a burden, now being tucked back into a bed and told to lie still while the men went out to handle it. Being carried was worse to her than being cut open. Being useless, being set aside, being a thing that was done for, rather than a person who did, was the one fate in all the world she could not survive. "Listen to me now," he said, and he lowered her back down onto the bed, slowly, and with great care, so that it would not feel to her like a defeat. "You have already won this, do you hear me? You found it, when no one else on earth even knew to look. You swam it home through the dark. Everything I do tonight at that boathouse, every single thing, I do because you put it into my hand. I am not leaving you behind, because you are weak. I am leaving you here because you are the only thing left standing in this house that is worth the guarding. And because I would sooner lose the boathouse and everything in it than come home and lose the room that you are in." He drew the small pistol from inside his coat and set it down on the blanket beside her open hand. "Lock the door behind me when I go. If anyone at all opens it, who is not me, you keep pulling this until it stops moving. Do you understand what I am telling you?" She looked down at the gun on the blanket, and then up at him, and the shutter came down over her eyes again, but slower this time, and it did not come down all the way. "Do not make me carry you up off a beach next time," she said. "I have done it once. I am not strong enough to do it twice." Kestrel Point sat where the coast twisted sharply back on itself, a long, crooked finger of black rock with an old boathouse standing at the very end of it, the kind of gray, weathered timber building that had already stood through 80 hard winters of salt and wind and would stand through 80 more. There was exactly one road in along the spine of the point, and Anselm, who had taught Caspar very nearly everything he knew, had chosen the place for precisely that reason, because one road in is one road that can be watched by one man. So Caspar did not use the road at all. Kellen brought them in along the water instead, in 2 dark low boats with the engines cut for the final quiet stretch, and they came up onto the point from the seaward side, the one side the old man had never once thought to watch, because the old man had spent 20 years teaching the boy, and had never imagined that the boy would one night come at him out of it. They moved up through the wet black rocks without a sound. Caspar had brought 6 men and Kellen, all dressed in flat, dark clothing, all carrying suppressed weapons held low, And every one of them had studied the map Linnea had drawn out of her own memory onto a single sheet of paper that morning, her hand shaking, getting every window and doorway and sightline right. They knew before they arrived where the light would fall and where a man could stand close to the timber wall and not be seen from inside. Through the salt-scabbed windows a single hard white lamp was burning, and standing full in the cone of it was Anselm Voss, gray-haired and unhurried and entirely at his ease. A leather case open on the workbench in front of him, and across the bench, two men Caspar did not recognize but whose careless posture he could read from 30 feet off in the dark. Adler men, sloppy with it, the kind of men who came out to collect their winnings from a beaten enemy, and had not planned for the enemy to walk in on them out of the sea. Caspar watched his mentor of 20 years lift a folder out of the open case and lay it on the bench for the two Adler men to inspect. And he heard, carried thin and broken on the wind through a cracked pane, the old and familiar voice he had trusted with his own life since before he could shave, saying easily that the boy suspected nothing. That the boy was at home nursing the wreck of his little cancelled wedding, that they would have the rest of it in hand before dawn, and that Caspar would not begin to understand what had been done to him until it was far too late to matter. He gave the signal. It was very fast and very quiet, which was the only kind of confrontation Caspar had ever had any respect for, because a loud one was the mark of men who had already lost control of their situation. His people came in through the side door and the seaward window in the same breath, and the two Adler men were still reaching for weapons they were never going to clear in time. And the muffled work of the suppressed guns in that closed timber space was no louder than a heavy stack of books dropped flat onto a floor. It was over before either man understood it had begun. One last wild sound went up into the roof beams, deafening in the enclosed space, and then Callan moved, and the room went still, and the hard, ringing silence that came pouring in behind the noise was somehow worse than the noise itself. Anselm had not run. There was nowhere on that narrow point for a man his age to run to, and he was far too old and too proud to try it and be seen trying. And so he stood there beside the bench, with his empty hands held a little away from his sides, palms open, and watched Caspar walk in out of the dark he had spent his whole life teaching the boy to own. "You came in from the water," Anselm said. He sounded of all things almost admiring. "I taught you that. You taught me a great many things." Caspar stopped a few feet short of him and did not yet raise the gun in his hand. He wanted, for one moment, before the rest of it, simply to look at the face. "Tell me it was money they had over you. Tell me they had a thing on you, that they threatened you, that there was a knife at somebody's throat. Give me something, Anselm, anything, because I am standing here, trying as hard as I have ever tried at anything, to find a version of this where the man who carried my father through the rain does not simply hand me over to my enemies for a fee." Something ugly and tired moved across the old man's face then, and the long-worn mask of the loyal mentor slipped entirely off it, and what lay underneath was smaller and older and far more bitter than Caspar had ever once let himself imagine. "You were never going to hand it down to me," Anselm said. "Not any of it. 30 years I gave to building this thing, first with your father, and then for you, carrying you, cleaning up behind you, and you were going to marry the whole of it, off to the Adlers, and let them hang their flag over my births and pension me off. At least they know what I am worth. At least they were going to leave me something to hold at the end of it." His lip curled back off his teeth. "All of this, and you nearly threw the whole game over. For what? For a little file clerk who could not keep herself in her own lane, a small gray woman who types your letters and fetches your coffee." "She is not a woman who types," Caspar said. "She is the reason that you are going to die here tonight, instead of me." He raised the gun, and Anselm Voss opened his mouth to say one more thing, and Caspar did not let him have it. It was quick, and it was final. The old man folded down against the workbench and slid slowly to the floor, and the leather case tipped as he went and spilled its folders out across the boards. 30 years of one man's loyalty ending in one final act of the opposite of it. And Caspar stood over the man who had taught him how to hold a knife, and how to shoot, and how to carry grief, and felt neither triumph, nor grief, nor anything at all, only a vast and echoing cold emptiness inside his chest, like a familiar room with every last piece of the furniture carried out of it in the night. Boss. Kellen, quiet, at his shoulder. It is clean. Nobody else was coming. The road is empty. What do you want done with them? Caspar looked down at the folders spilled across the boards, at the physical originals she had told him would be here. The last remaining thread that could open him up next month if he left it lying. He crouched down and gathered them up, every last page off the wood, and stood and put the whole stack into Kellen's hands. Everything on paper comes home, all of it. She will want to read it, and she will find things in it that none of us can. He straightened his back and looked, once, at Anselm on the floor. Take the two of them back to the Adler line and lay them somewhere. Silas will be sure to find them by morning. And leave the old man there with them. A pause. Silas sent men out onto my water to make one of mine disappear. I am returning his men to him, and I am returning the one of mine that he bought right along with them. Let him sit at his breakfast and work out the exchange rate for himself. The drive back was the longest of his life, and somehow also the shortest, both at the very same time. The adrenaline drained out of him mile by mile and left behind it the same cold, empty room in his chest, and underneath that emptiness, rising slowly as the miles fell away, was the single clean pull of wanting to be in one particular room in the world. When the house finally came up out of the dark, he was out of the car before it had fully stopped for the second time that night, and he went in through the pale, silent corridors, with his shirt gone stiff across the front, with dried salt and other men's blood, and came at last to the door of the room with the good light and put his hand to the handle. And the handle would not turn. She had locked it. She had done exactly the thing that he had told her to do. He put his forehead against the cool painted wood of the door for a moment, and stood there, and something in his chest that had been clenched tight as a fist since the beach let go all at once, completely, and it was very nearly more than he could stand up under. Linnea, he said against the wood. It is me. Silence, from the other side. Then, the soft dragging scrape of the heavy chair she must have wedged up under the handle, and the small hard click of the lock turning back, and the door came open, and there she was, on her feet by nothing but main force and will, swaying where she stood, one hand white-knuckled and locked around the frame of the door to hold herself up, and the other hanging down at her side with the little pistol still in it, her finger laid flat along the outside of the guard exactly the way it ought to be, held there steady by a woman who had never in her life fired a gun, and who had plainly spent every hour he was gone standing ready to. "You didn't shoot me," he said. "You knocked," she said. Her eyes were already moving over him, over the salt, over the dark stiff stains, on the front of his shirt and his cuffs, reading him, and he watched her arrive at the whole answer before she had finished framing the question. "It is done. It is done." She let out a long breath that seemed to empty her right out to the walls of herself, and the stubborn strength that had held her upright against the doorframe went out of her body along with it, and her knees simply stopped holding her weight. He caught her before she reached the floor, one arm behind her back, and the other sweeping up under the bend of her knees. And this time, she did not fight him, at all, did not stiffen or insist through her teeth that she could stand on her own. She let her head come to rest against his chest, against the stiff ruined shirt, and let him take the whole of her weight. And that, more than anything else in that long bloody night, told him exactly how far she had come toward trusting him, because Linnea Rourke let no living person carry her. He eased the pistol gently out of her hand and set it aside on the table and lifted her fully off her feet, and he did not carry her back to the bright ground floor room where Halloran had worked over her. He carried her up the sweeping stairs instead, past the whole guest wing, to his own rooms at the far end of the quiet house, where a fire had been lit in the grate and the sea was only a distant hush far below the black glass of the windows. And he laid her down in the center of the wide bed and drew the blankets up over her thin shoulders and sat himself down on the edge of the mattress, where he could see her face in the firelight. "This is your room," she said. It was not a question. Her eyes were already sliding halfway closed. "Yes. You walked past 3 perfectly good guest rooms to get here." "I did." She was quiet for a moment. The firelight moved and shifted across the walls and the ceiling above them. "You know that I organize your entire life," she said drowsily, the words slurring at their edges. "4 years. And I have never once been allowed a step past that door." "That," he said, "was a mistake. One of a great many I have been making steadily for 4 years without noticing. I am going to correct them. All of them, in their proper order of importance." He reached out and pushed a stiff, salt-dried strand of hair back off her bruised face, more carefully than he had done anything with his hands in a very long time. "Julian's care is handled, not for this month. Permanently, for as long as he needs it, out of my own accounts. I made the call from the car before I did anything else. And the 3 days out of the year you have been rationing to sit at his bed, you will take them from now on whenever you want them, and a great many more than 3, and you will take them without ever once asking me, because they were never mine to give or to keep in the first place." His voice roughened and dropped. "You should have told me any of it." "I couldn't." Her eyes came open, and there was something entirely naked in them now, the shudder gone. "The whole point of me, the only point of me, is that I do not need anything. The day that you find out I need something is the exact day I stop being the one person you never have to spend a moment worrying about. I stop being useful to you, and I start being a liability that you have to manage." A faint, cracked ghost of her old dryness surfaced through it, "and liabilities get left behind on beaches." "You," Caspar said, "are the least liable person that I have ever known in my life. And if you ever again swim out into a black sea in the dark to keep a truth from me, because you were afraid that I might think less of you for needing something, I will follow you straight into the water and drown the both of us out of pure spite, and then where will your books be?" And Linnea Rourke, who did not laugh, laughed. It was small, and it was broken, and it plainly hurt her bruised ribs to do it, and it was without any question at all the best sound that Caspar Vela had heard in years. He let her sleep on through the whole of the morning, and he did not sleep at all himself. He stood at the tall window of his own room, with a cup of black coffee going slowly cold and forgotten in his hand, and watched the light come up over the water, gray at first, and then by degrees a hard beaten gold, and a little after 8, the phone in his pocket buzzed once against his hip with a number out of the north end of the coast, and he answered it standing where he could see her breathing, slow and even, in the bed behind him. "Vela." Silas Adler's voice down the line was not the smooth, unhurried voice of a patriarch arranging his daughter's advantageous marriage. It was tight and low, and running underneath it was the particular fury of a powerful man who has walked out to his own gate in the early hours and looked down at something left there for him, and has understood, for the first time in a great many years, that he is not the most dangerous man in the conversation he is about to have. "You left 3 of my people at my gate in the night. One of them was mine, and one of them, God help you, was your own. I returned your property to you," Caspar said. "I thought that you would want to know how your investment had performed. You murdered Anselm Voss. I retired, an employee of mine who had been quietly drawing a second salary from you behind my back," Caspar said evenly. "And you will have noticed that I sent him home to you, rather than to the bottom of the sea, which is where your people intended to send mine. Consider that a courtesy. It is the very last one you are ever going to get from me. This is war, Vela. You have no earthly idea what it is you have just started. You cannot move a single crate of product on this coast without the shipping lanes that my family controls, and you know it. You will be choking inside of a single season. Here is what is going to happen now, so listen." Caspar's voice did not rise. It never once rose. In the moments that actually mattered, And this was one of them. The marriage is dead and buried. Your daughter is free to arrange herself, however she pleases, with my compliments. But if a single one of your boats crosses into my water, if one of your couriers so much as gets the soles of his shoes wet on my side of the point, if I so much as hear a whisper that you have breathed in the direction of a certain care facility on the cliff path above Sable Cove, I will bring them to your dining room and lay them on your table myself, and I will do it while you are sitting down to your breakfast. He let it sit a moment. You sent men out onto black water to make one of mine disappear. She swam home. Silas, think hard about that every time you look out at the sea. The very person you tried to erase is the person who now holds every account number, every route, every date, and every buried name you believed was safe. She has neater handwriting than your accountants, and a longer memory than your lawyers, and she works for me. You are not at war with me at all. You are at war with my secretary, and you lost it 2 nights ago, out past the point, in the dark. There was a silence on the line then, long and airless and complete, the silence of a man sitting alone, somewhere recalculating every single thing he had believed he understood about the board in front of him and the pieces on it. Do not call this number again, Caspar said, and he ended the call, and dropped the phone back into his pocket, and turned around toward the bed. She was awake. She had been awake, he realized as he turned, for most of it, lying still against the pillows with her eyes open and fixed steadily on him across the room, wearing an expression he could not immediately put a name to. You made me sound absolutely terrifying, she said. I described you accurately, he said. She healed slowly and badly for the first stretch of it, largely because she would not stop trying to work, and there was a period of about 2 weeks, in which the Great Cold War between Caspar Vela and the entire Adler family was a distant rumble compared to the daily domestic war fought in that house over the single question of whether Linnea Rourke was going to be allowed to open a laptop. She lost that war, for the most part, which was a genuinely new experience for her and one she bore with a great deal of dry, muttered complaint and a very small, carefully hidden amount of relief, because it turned out, to her evident surprise, to be a strange and unfamiliar sort of comfort to be fussed over by a man who had spent 4 straight years failing to notice she was in the room at all. Julian's care never once wavered again after that night, and it never would. Caspar went up the cliff path with her the first time she was strong enough for the climb, and stood a little apart by the tall, bright windows, while she sat at the bedside and held her brother's slack hand in both of hers and told him, in a low, gentle voice, a carefully edited version of a story about a difficult few weeks at work. And in the early mornings after that, when Julian still slept, she went down to the cove and swam, and Caspar sat on the cold sand in his expensive coat and watched her cut cleanly back and forth through the same gray water she had once crawled out of half dead, and understood that he was looking at the single strongest person he had ever known, doing the one thing left in all the world that asked absolutely nothing of her in return. The morning she finally cornered him about the true shape of things to come, they were out on the terrace where the wedding was supposed to have taken place, and she had a tablet in her hands out of sheer force of habit, even though he had expressly forbidden it, and she was frowning down at the screen of it. If we cut the Adler lanes off entirely, the way you told Silas we would, we lose the great majority of the northern margin, she said, not looking up. I have run the numbers 4 separate ways this morning, and they do not improve with staring. There is one version, only one, where we reroute everything through the eastern berths and take the loss on the chin for 2 full quarters and come out the far side cleaner and genuinely independent for the first time in the family's history. But it means a lean and ugly winter for everyone, and it means you have to stop telling yourself the story where you were ever going to end up the biggest family on this whole coast. Someone has to keep the books balanced, Caspar said. Someone does. She lowered the tablet at last and looked up at him, and the shutter was not down over her eyes. It had not, he realized, been all the way down in weeks. Is that what I am to you now, then? the someone who keeps your books balanced for you. He crossed the terrace to where she stood and came in close, and took the tablet gently but firmly out of her hands and set it down on the low wall behind her, so that there was nothing left between the two of them. "No," he said. "You have never once been that. Not even at the beginning, and I was simply not paying enough attention for 4 years to notice what you actually were." He lifted his hand and rested it against the side of her face, against the place where the bruise had been, and where the skin had long since healed over clean. "You are the person who found the knife at my throat when every single man I trusted in the world was holding onto the handle of it. You are the person who swam a black sea rather than, let me think, for one moment, that you were a burden to me. You held the whole of my life balanced in your 2 hands for 4 years, and I paid you a salary for it, and told myself that made the two of us even." His thumb moved slowly along the line of her jaw. "You are not my secretary. You are my partner. And any man who ever again looks at you the way Anselm looked at you, as though you are some small gray woman who types the letters and fetches the coffee, is going to learn the same lesson I have, which is that you are the single most dangerous thing I own, and the one thing on this earth that I would burn the entire coast down to the waterline to keep." She stared up at him, and the very last of the careful walls she had spent her whole life patiently building up around herself came down, quietly, without any drama at all, the way a tide goes out from a beach in the night when no one is there to watch it go. "You canceled a marriage into the most powerful family on this coast," she said slowly, "for a woman you found half dead on a beach." "I canceled a business transaction," Caspar said, "for the only person who ever actually protected me. There is a very great difference between those two things, and you of all the people in the world should appreciate an accurate ledger." And Linnea Rourke, who did not cry and who did not laugh, and who did not, as an unbending rule of long standing, ever once allow herself to be moved, did all three of those things at the very same moment, and put her hand flat against the center of his chest over the steady, hard, living beat of his heart, and let him pull her in against him, and rested there, in the exact place where 300 guests were meant to have stood and watched two empires marry, held instead in the arms of a man who had learned, almost too late and only barely in time, exactly what it was that he had been walking past every single morning for 4 long years. Endless and indifferent, the very same water that had tried to take her and failed. And that, in the end, is how you find out who truly belongs standing at your side. Not at the altar that you carefully arranged, on the beach that you never once meant to walk. Here is where the story finally comes to rest. So, let me say the thing out loud, before you go. Caspar Vela did not merely call off a wedding. He set fire to the entire safe, arranged, loveless life he had built for himself the very moment he understood that the quietest and most overlooked person in his whole empire was the one who had been holding all of it together the entire time. That turn, from the woman forgotten in the shadows to the partner standing at his side, from a cold arrangement of convenience to the fiercest kind of loyalty there is exactly the sort of story we love most to tell here on this channel. The ones where the person everybody underestimated turns out to have been holding every last card. If this dark coastal tale of betrayal and devotion pulled you all the way in, do me one small favor before you go and press that like button and subscribe so you never miss the next one, and send it along to somebody who appreciates a slow burn with real teeth in it. And tell me down in the comments what your favorite moment of the whole thing was. Was it the beach, or the boathouse, or the phone call that quietly finished off an entire dynasty? I read everyone, and I will see you again very soon in the next story.